Washington, D.C. had never witnessed such a brutal confrontation between David and Goliath, and this time, David wore red lipstick and wasn't afraid to name monsters. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the 35-year-old congresswoman from the Bronx, did the unthinkable on a Friday in July 2025 in less than 280 characters. She called the President of the United States a rapist and directly connected his administration to the most explosive and silenced case in American politics, the Jeffrey Epstein Files. Trump's reaction: instant, visceral, uncontrolled. Within 9 seconds, his communications director, Stephen Chung, fired back with a response so aggressive it made clear AOC had hit an exposed nerve, bleeding and painful. But why did this confrontation happen exactly now? Why, among all the political battles fought in 2025, did this mention of Epstein's name make Trump and his propaganda machine lose control? The answer lies in a broken promise, in hidden files, and in a MAGA support base that, for the first time, was beginning to question whether the man they placed absolute faith in was protecting something or someone. AOC wasn't just provoking, she was exposing the wound that the White House was desperately trying to cover with public relations bandages. The Epstein case had always been a shadow over Washington, an open secret that everyone knew existed, but no one dared to confront directly. Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire financier convicted of sex trafficking minors, was found dead in his cell in 2019, under circumstances that fueled conspiracy theories on both sides of the political spectrum. But what really haunted the country wasn't his death, it was the list. A supposed list of powerful clients who would have benefited from his abuse scheme, a list that could topple careers, destroy legacies, and expose an elite corrupted to the core. And Trump, during his 2024 campaign, had promised, "I will declassify the Epstein files." But campaign promises evaporate quickly when you're in the Oval Office. In July 2025, after months of public pressure, the Department of Justice and the FBI released a devastating memo. There was no evidence of a client list, and Epstein had, definitively, committed suicide. The conclusion was met with outrage. Even Trump allies, figures like Elon Musk, Dan Bongino, and Pam Bondi, publicly expressed skepticism and anger. Musk, in a fit of rage against the president himself during a fight over legislation, even tweeted that Trump was in the files and that that's the real reason they weren't released. It was in this moment of internal chaos, of growing distrust within MAGA itself, that AOC launched her verbal grenade. Wow, who would have imagined that electing a rapist would complicate the release of the Epstein files? The tweet was simple, direct, incendiary. AOC wasn't speculating. She was using a legal fact. Trump was found civilly liable for rape and defamation in the E. Jean Carroll case in 2023. She was reminding the country that the man who promised to drain the swamp might, in fact, be sunk in it up to his neck. And most importantly, she was giving voice to a suspicion already circulating behind the scenes. Why was the Trump administration obstructing, blocking, and complicating the release of documents he himself had promised to reveal? The White House response wasn't a counter-argument, it was a devastating personal attack. Stephen Chung, in a statement sent to the press, called AOC blockhead, said she was pretending to be from the ghetto, and accused her of having Trump derangement syndrome that rotted her pie-sized brain. The reaction was so disproportionate, so furious, that it confirmed exactly what AOC was insinuating. There was something there. Something Trump didn't want the world to see, and he was willing to destroy reputations to maintain the silence. But AOC wasn't alone in this crusade. In November 2025, the political landscape changed dramatically, after 218 congresspeople signed a petition forcing a vote on releasing the Epstein files. Trump made a surprising reversal. He publicly declared he supported the release of the documents, claiming he had nothing to hide. It was a political survival move. If he continued blocking, he would look guilty. If he supported it, he could control the narrative. But it was too late. Newly revealed emails showed Epstein saying in 2011 that a victim spent hours at my house with Trump and that he was never mentioned once, implying a possible silence agreement. In 2019, another email stated, of course he knew about the girls. He asked Elaine to stop. These emails weren't conspiracy theories. They were documented evidence, revealed to the Senate, cited in official letters. And AOC, with her relentless ability to transform politics into visual theater, was using each of these revelations as ammunition. She didn't need 9 seconds to make Trump lose his cool, she only needed to speak the truth out loud. And now, as the House of Representatives voted to release the files with bipartisan support of 427-1, one question burned in everyone's mind: what else was hidden in those documents? What did Trump fear so much that he was willing to wage a public war against a second-term congresswoman? And, even more frightening, what would happen when the silence was finally broken? The friendship began like so many dangerous alliances do, in luxury, ego, and the promise of mutual benefit. Around 1990, when Jeffrey Epstein purchased a sprawling mansion just 2 miles north of Mar-a-Lago, he wasn't just buying real estate, he was buying proximity to power. Donald Trump, who had acquired Mar-a-Lago 5 years earlier, was already the king of Palm Beach's glittering social scene, a brash, self-promoting real estate mogul with a taste for gold leaf opulence and an insatiable hunger for attention. Epstein, the mysterious financier with shadowy wealth and even shadowier connections, was the perfect complement: energetic, charming, and equally obsessed with being seen in the right circles. They were outer borough New Yorkers who had conquered Manhattan, to showmen who thrived on spectacle and scandal, and for nearly 15 years, they were inseparable. But what AOC exposed in her incendiary tweet wasn't just a friendship, it was a brotherhood built on shared appetites. In 1992, Trump invited NBC to film a party at Mar-a-Lago, an event so revealing that decades later it would become forensic evidence of their intimacy. The footage, archived and unearthed in 2019, shows Trump and Epstein surrounded by young women, cheerleaders from the Buffalo Bills, in town for a game against the Miami Dolphins. In one chilling moment, Trump leans into Epstein's ear, whispers something while pointing at women across the room, and Epstein doubles over in laughter. The body language is unmistakable. These were two men who shared secrets, who spoke in a code only they understood. This wasn't casual socializing. This was conspiracy in real time, caught on camera, preserved forever, and it didn't stop there. Months after that party, Trump hosted another event at Mar-a-Lago, this time a so-called calendar girl competition. Georgia Rainey, a Florida businessman who arranged the event, arrived expecting a room full of VIPs. Instead, he found Trump and Epstein alone, with 28 young women. Arani later recalled his shock. "I said, Donald, this is supposed to be a party with VIP. You're telling me it's you and Epstein." The implication was devastating. Trump, the man who would one day sit in the Oval Office, had orchestrated a private gathering with a man who was, at that very moment, already cultivating a network of abuse. And Trump knew. He had to have known. Newly discovered photos from 1993 confirmed what many had suspected, but few could prove. Epstein attended Trump's wedding to Marla Maples at the Plaza Hotel. Until CNN's Skyfile unearthed archived images in 2025. Epstein's presence at one of Trump's most intimate life events had been buried, forgotten, conveniently erased from the official narrative. The photographer, Gene Jones, remembered Epstein clearly, remembered the way he looked at him, the way he handed over his card with the title financial advisor. Jones captured Trump with his arm around his two young children, standing next to Epstein, who leaned casually against a railing as if he belonged there, because in Trump's world, he did. These weren't distant acquaintances. These were men who attended each other's weddings, who vacationed together, who shared private jets and private jokes. The private jets. That's where the story gets darker. Flight logs released during the trial of one of Epstein's associates confirmed that Trump flew on Epstein's infamous aircraft, later nicknamed the Lolita, expressed multiple times in the 1990s, and according to Epstein himself, in explosive audio tapes recorded by author Michael Wolff, Trump first had sex with his future wife, Melania Noss, on that very jet. Epstein also claimed, in those same recordings, that Trump liked to fuck his friends' wives and that he was Trump's closest friend for 10 years. These weren't rumors whispered in tabloids. These were Epstein's own words, preserved on tape, submitted to Congress, and released to the public in 2025 as part of ongoing investigations. But perhaps the most damning evidence came not from photographs or flight logs, but from Epstein's own correspondence. In 2003, Trump sent Epstein a birthday card, not a simple greeting, but a card featuring a drawing of a naked woman. The card was collected by Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice and partner in crime, and placed in a leather-bound photo album that was later examined by the Justice Department during its investigation into the sex trafficking ring. Think about that. The future president of the United States sent a sexually explicit birthday card to a man who was, at that moment, actively trafficking underage girls. And Maxwell, now serving 20 years in federal prison, thought it was important enough to preserve. Trump's defenders have long insisted that the two men had a falling out in the mid-2000s, around 2004, over a real estate deal in Palm Beach. They claimed Trump cut ties, banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, and never spoke to him again. But emails released by House Democrats in November 2025 paint a very different picture. In a 2011 message, Epstein told Ghislaine Maxwell that a victim, whose name was redacted, spent hours at my house with Trump, and that Trump was never mentioned once, implying a deliberate agreement to keep his name out of legal proceedings. Then, in 2019, Epstein wrote to Michael Wolff. Of course he knew about the girls, as he asked Ghislaine to stop. Read that again. Trump knew. He knew about the trafficking. He knew about the abuse. And his response wasn't to report it, it was to ask Maxwell to stop. When AOC called Trump a rapist and connected him to the Epstein Files, she wasn't speculating. She was synthesizing decades of evidence, photographs, flight logs, emails, audio recordings, and court documents into one undeniable truth. Donald Trump was not a passive bystander in Jeffrey Epstein's world. He was a participant. And when Trump's team erupted in fury, when they called AOC deranged and attacked her intelligence, they weren't defending his innocence. They were protecting a secret that, once fully exposed, could unravel everything. Because here's what terrified Trump more than any congressional investigation or special counsel. The American people, seeing him not as the tough guy president who grabbed them by the pussy, but as the man who laughed and whispered in Epstein's ear while young women danced around them. The man who hosted private parties with a predator. The man who sent him birthday cards with naked drawings. The man who, according to Epstein's own words, knew about the girls and did nothing to save them. November 18, 2025, was the day American democracy did something it almost never does anymore. It moved fast. The House of Representatives, a chamber paralyzed by partisan gridlock for years, voted 427-1 to pass the Epstein Files. Transparency Act, a bill that would force the Department of Justice to publicly release every document, email, investigation record, and piece of evidence related to Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days. Only one person voted against it, Republican Congressman Clay Higgins of Louisiana, whose dissent was never explained. Everyone else, Democrats, Republicans, MAGA hardliners, never-Trumpers, progressives, moderates, united behind a single undeniable demand: the truth. Hours later, the Senate didn't debate. It didn't stall. It didn't filibuster. Senate Majority Leader John Thune brought the bill to the floor, and, in a move so rare, it stunned Capitol Hill veterans, the Senate passed it by unanimous consent. No amendments, no negotiations, no backroom deals. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic Minority Leader, stood before cameras and declared, "There will be no hiding, no games, no cover-ups. We will pressure them to release the full, unredacted files." By the next day, November 19th, President Donald Trump, the man who had spent months resisting, obstructing, and dismissing calls for transparency, signed the bill into law. But how did it come to this? How did a president who had once called the Epstein investigation a Democrat hoax suddenly become the man signing legislation that could expose his own name in thousands of pages of damning evidence? The answer lies in the most dangerous force in American politics, a base that stops trusting its leader. In July 2025, when the Justice Department and FBI released their memo claiming there was no client list and that Epstein's death was definitively a suicide, Trump's own supporters revolted. This wasn't the typical left versus right battle. This was MAGA versus Trump. Elon Musk, who had become one of Trump's most powerful allies, publicly accused the president of being in the files and suggested that Trump's reluctance to release documents proved his guilt. Dan Bongino, the conservative podcaster with millions of listeners, turned on Attorney General Pam Bondi, demanding her resignation for what he saw as a cover-up. Even Pam Bondi herself, Trump's hand-picked Attorney General, faced such intense backlash that Trump had to personally call some of her most vocal critics to beg them to back off. This was the loyalty test AOC had predicted, and Trump was failing it. For years, Trump had wielded conspiracy theories like weapons, QAnon, Pizzagate, the deep state, using them to bind his followers to him with the promise that he alone could expose the truth. But when the moment came, when his own Justice Department released a memo that contradicted the very theories he had amplified, his base felt betrayed. They had believed him when he said he would drain the swamp. They had trusted him when he promised to release the Epstein Files. And now, faced with a memo that cleared the government of wrongdoing and dismissed their darkest suspicions, they didn't blame the DOJ, they blamed Trump. AOC understood this fracture better than anyone. When she tweeted her brutal accusation in July, calling Trump a rapist and mocking his failure to release the files, she wasn't just attacking him, she was amplifying the doubts already festering within his own movement. And it worked. Within days, hashtags like #release the Epstein Files were trending, not on liberal Twitter, but on MAGA forums, Truth Social, and conservative talk radio. Trump's most loyal defenders were no longer defending him. They were demanding answers. By November, the pressure had become unbearable. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, a Florida Republican and staunch Trump ally, launched a discharge petition, a rare procedural maneuver that allows Congress to force a vote on a bill even if leadership opposes it. She needed 218 signatures. Within days, she had them from both parties. Speaker Mike Johnson, who had privately lobbied against the bill and asked for amendments to protect victims, was steamrolled. The vote was scheduled. And Trump, realizing he could no longer stop it without looking guilty, made a calculated reversal. He publicly endorsed the bill. "I have nothing to hide," he told reporters, his voice dripping with false confidence. But everyone knew the truth. This wasn't courage, it was survival. The bill itself was straightforward but devastating in its scope. It mandated that the DOJ release all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials related to Epstein, including FBI files, prosecutor memos, and grand jury evidence in a searchable and downloadable format within 30 days of the president's signature. There were narrow exceptions for ongoing investigations and grand jury secrecy rules, but legal experts warned these loopholes were small. If Trump's name appeared in emails, flight logs, or witness statements, the public would see it. If Epstein had named him in recorded conversations, those tapes would be released. And if any DOJ official tried to redact or delay the release, they would face immediate congressional investigation. Danielle Bensky, a survivor of Epstein's trafficking ring, stood outside the Capitol on November 18 and wept when she heard the news. She had spent years lobbying, testifying, and begging lawmakers to act. She had prepared herself for another brutal fight in the Senate, armed with talking points and victim testimonies. But then, a staffer whispered in her ear, "They passed it. Unanimous consent. It's going to Trump's desk." She couldn't believe it. "I think it's an incredible thing that shows what the American people can do," she told CNN, her voice breaking. But not everyone celebrated. Behind closed doors, Trump's legal team was already strategizing. Attorney General Pam Bondi, in carefully worded statements, emphasized that the DOJ would follow the law, but she never specified how quickly or how completely. When pressed by senators about potential delays, she cited ongoing investigations and victim protections as reasons certain materials might be withheld. Senator John Thune, the Republican Majority Leader, defended her, saying he trusted the DOJ to make the right decisions about what to release. Translation: the fight wasn't over. December 19, 2025, was now the deadline, exactly 30 days from Trump's signature. And as that date approached, the question on everyone's mind wasn't whether the files would be released, it was what they would contain. Would Trump's name appear next to Epstein's in emails discussing the girls? Would flight logs confirm more trips on the Lolita Express than previously admitted? Would Ghislaine Maxwell's interviews, already partially released, reveal even darker secrets about the man now sitting in the Oval Office? AOC didn't need to tweet again. She had already planted the seed. And now, the entire country was waiting to see what grew from it. The deadline looms like a storm on the horizon. December 19, 2025. Exactly 30 days from the moment Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law, the Department of Justice is required to release every unclassified document, email, flight log, immunity agreement, and investigative memo related to Jeffrey Epstein in a fully searchable, downloadable format. But as the calendar ticks forward, a darker truth emerges: the battle for transparency is far from over. And AOC, the congresswoman who ignited this inferno with a single tweet, knows it. On the surface, Trump's signature appeared to be a victory. CNN cameras captured him at his desk, pen in hand, smiling for the photo op as he signed the bill. "I have nothing to hide," he repeated, the same phrase he'd used since July, when the pressure became unbearable. But within hours, cracks appeared in the facade. Attorney General Pam Bondi, standing beside FBI Director Kash Patel at a press conference, refused to guarantee full disclosure. When pressed by reporters about whether every document would be released, she responded with calculated ambiguity: "We will follow the law and ensure maximum transparency." Notice what she didn't say. She didn't say yes, because buried in the legislation are loopholes narrowed, legally defensible escape routes that could allow the Trump administration to withhold significant portions of the files. The bill permits the DOJ to redact or delay the release of any document that would jeopardize an active federal investigation or ongoing prosecution, provided the withholding is narrowly tailored and temporary. It's a reasonable exception on paper, designed to protect legitimate law enforcement operations. But in practice, it's a trapdoor, and Trump's legal team knows it. Consider this: Trump himself ordered a special investigation into Epstein's connections to prominent Democrats, specifically targeting former President Bill Clinton, economist Larry Summers, and LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman. If that investigation is declared active and ongoing, the administration could argue that any documents mentioning these individuals, and, conveniently, anyone else in those same files, including Trump, must be withheld to avoid jeopardizing the probe. It's a clever strategy: weaponize transparency as a tool for selective concealment. Release documents that embarrass political enemies. Bury documents that implicate allies, and justify it all under the guise of national security and prosecutorial integrity. 2 federal judges have already called out this tactic. When the DOJ released 33,000 pages of Epstein-related documents to Congress in earlier months, judges reviewing the material noted that the release appeared designed as a diversion, a massive data dump that offered little new information while creating the illusion of cooperation. One judge bluntly stated that the government possessed far more extensive information that it could disclose at any time, but chose not to. Translation: the administration is playing games. and December 19th might bring more of the same. AOC understood this risk from the beginning. That's why her July tweet wasn't just an insult, it was a strategic provocation designed to make inaction politically impossible. By calling Trump a rapist and linking him directly to the Epstein cover-up, she forced the MAGA base to choose loyalty to Trump or loyalty to the conspiracy theories he had spent years amplifying. And when figures like Elon Musk, Dan Bongino, and Thomas Massie sided with transparency over Trump, the president lost control of his own narrative. Representative Thomas Massie, a Kentucky Republican with 1.3 million followers on X, became an unlikely ally in this fight. He launched a public whip count, tracking which members of Congress had signed on to the Epstein Files bill and encouraging constituents to pressure their representatives. "Keep the pressure on. It's working," Massie tweeted after Bondi announced the DOJ would release grand jury transcripts. "But we want all the files." His message was clear: partial transparency is not enough. And his influence, combined with AOC's rhetorical firepower, created a bipartisan coalition that Trump could not intimidate or dismiss. But even with the law signed and the deadline set, the question remains: will Trump actually comply? Or will December 19th bring another carefully orchestrated release of irrelevant documents, designed to satisfy the letter of the law while violating its spirit? House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Trump ally, warned that the bill could harm innocent people whose names appear in the files through no fault of their own. He argued passionately that simply corresponding with Epstein should not be treated as evidence of wrongdoing. It's a fair point, except that nobody is asking for names of random Epstein acquaintances. They're asking for evidence of crimes, cover-ups, and complicity. And Johnson's sudden concern for innocence feels less like principle and more like preemptive damage control. The law itself anticipates this resistance. Any information withheld or redacted must be accompanied by a written justification, submitted to Congress within 15 days of the initial release. The administration is also required to provide an unredacted list of all government officials and politically exposed persons mentioned in the documents, even if those names are redacted in the public version. This creates a paper trail, a record of what was hidden and why. If the DOJ tries to bury significant material, lawmakers will know, and the public will demand answers. AOC has already won, even if the files remain incomplete. She proved that a single congresswoman, armed with nothing but a Twitter account and the willingness to say what others wouldn't, could fracture Trump's coalition and force accountability where none seemed possible. Conservatives called for Trump to sue her for defamation, comparing her tweet to George Stephanopoulos' comment that led to a $15 million settlement. But Trump never filed the lawsuit, because filing would require discovery. And discovery would mean depositions, subpoenas, and evidence presented in court, the very transparency he spent months avoiding. Senator John Ossoff, a Georgia Democrat facing a tough re-election in a red state, has already incorporated the Epstein saga into his campaign, using Trump's ties to Epstein as proof of moral corruption and hypocrisy. Other Democrats are following his lead, recognizing that the issue transcends partisan politics. It taps into a deeper disgust with elites who protect each other at the expense of justice. This isn't just a Washington scandal anymore, it's a cultural reckoning. On December 19, 2025, the world will watch. If the DOJ releases thousands of pages of damning evidence, flight logs showing Trump on the Lolita Express, emails confirming his knowledge of the girls, witness statements placing him at Epstein's properties during criminal activity, Trump's presidency will be irreversibly tainted. If the DOJ releases a sanitized version, stripped of anything incriminating, Congress will investigate, leakers will emerge, and the cover-up will become the story. Either way, Trump loses. Because AOC didn't just cite the Epstein case in a tweet, she weaponized it, and in doing so, she reminded America of something it had almost forgotten. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. 9 seconds. That's how long it took for Trump's team to lose their composure after AOC's tweet. And now, with the December deadline approaching, the entire world is counting down, waiting to see if the man who promised to drain the swamp will finally be forced to answer for the monsters he called friends.